This episode of The Business of Agriculture is brought to you by Nori. Feeling left out of carbon markets? Nori is a carbon removal marketplace that welcomes early adopters of regenerative farming. We work directly with farmers to enter their data and project their carbon credits, which the farmer owns and sets the price on. Nori is the marketplace, not the middleman, so farmers get paid directly once their credits are sold. We believe that carbon credits should be an asset the farmer controls, not the rights that they sell. To learn more on how you can enroll your farm, visit nori.com/growers. And if you are a company looking to get involved with carbon markets, reach out to hello@nori.com. Nori, a carbon marketplace for early adopters. Visit nori.com/growers.
Well, greetings and welcome to another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture podcast. It's me, Damian Mason, your host. You already knew that because it said that in the introduction. I've got a great program for you today. Curt Covington, he is the Senior Director of Institutional Credit at AgAmerica, which is one of the largest non-bank agricultural lending firms in the United States of America. Curt was on this podcast about 9 months ago, and we talked about all things economic, all things impacting agriculture, all things that we see in the newspaper or we hear about, and he brings it back to the farm gate and to the consumer. So he and I are really, a good pair in this regard because I'm the current events marketplace guy. He gives me some real numbers and some economics behind it. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about interest rates, land values, the 10-7-3-1 rule of agricultural deals, farm income, government payments, inputs, China, Mexico, the trade situation, and weather out west. That means, is the weather out west going to spread and give us some scares? Big stuff, about 10 topics I just named, and you know others will come up. Curt Covington, thanks for being here, my friend.
Good to see you again, Damian. How are you?
I'm good. So do a little background. If you haven't heard the prior episode with Curt, it's probably go back about 9 months ago, and you'll find it, dear listener. Curt and I also have some history. We have spoken to the same crowd, so we've bumped into each other on the road, which is how we know one another, because as you can imagine, there are these meetings, these agricultural business meetings. They have people like him on stage, you have people like me on stage. And then we had to take a cab or an Uber, or maybe we just hired a rickshaw, I think it was, in Lubbock, Texas, to haul us, or maybe it was Amarillo, I guess it was, to haul us to the airport. So he and I rode in the same rickshaw together in Amarillo. And when we were speaking to the Texas Bankers Ag division. All right. The first thing you wanted to lead off with was interest rates. Federal Reserve, they told us that interest rates were going to go up 1/4 point. They did. What's the big deal?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is, we also heard from the Federal Reserve, and we've heard from a number of pundits, economists, that there was going to be 6 rate hikes, 8 rate hikes, 7 rate hikes, 15 rate hikes, 4 rate hikes. Honestly, Ukraine then fell in the middle of all of this, and then I think the Federal Reserve thought, time out. Let's back this off just a little bit. But as you know, Damian, and I think many of your listeners know, in the yield curve, what we call the yield curve of interest rate, there's anticipation of inflation and there's anticipation of what the Federal Reserve is going to do, follows, the 10-year Treasury. If I had talked to you in January, my 10-7-3-1 rule would have applied. And here we are, not quite at the end of March, but close to it. Yeah. It's now the 10-5-0-0 rule.
All right, before we get to your 10-7-3-1 rule, which I think is brilliant, and also it gives a real view to anybody that's in business. Remember, my listeners are ag professionals and then progressive, successful-minded farmers. I always like to let them see things from the other side of the desk. I always said background in comedy, you want to get good in comedy like I was doing 28 years ago, you record yourself and then you listen to the tape from the audience's perspective. And by God, when you see your business from their perspective, it makes you better fast. And that's one of the things I like about having you on here. You're going to give the other side to the ag professional, the ag company, the ag entrepreneur, or the farm, or their rule. First off, interest rates. To the average listener that just has a normal job that wants to be a better ag professional, saying, why does this matter so much? Well, the big story is we use a shitload of borrowed money in production agriculture. So start me there.
Interest costs, as a general rule of thumb, in normal times, Damian, historically, particularly the last 10 years, have represented such a small percentage of the operating budget for the average farmer across the U.S. that, it was pretty much inconsequential. People had their operating loans that were on variable rates. They didn't see that rate move really much for 10 years. People that were borrowing long-term, I was talking to a borrower yesterday. He says, I have not been on a fixed rate loan in 25 years, and I'm way ahead of anybody that locked their interest rate in on a fixed rate. But today, it's a lot different. The thing that gets impacted first is the margin on your operating budget. So if let's just pick some numbers, right? Whether you want to use prime, LIBOR, SOFR, pick something.
Yeah. Just use a number that we all heard, and then compare it to the average production ag operation that's borrowing $1 million, which to some people, to your neighbors in suburbia, it's like, these people borrow $1 million each season for operating. And you're like, some of them are a few million, right?
So interest cost has gone from one of your cheapest. And look, Damian, I say this to everybody. Bankers, we'd like to say that we're building relationships. The truth of the matter is, when you're dealing with farmers, they're looking at money and they're saying, how much rent do I have to pay for that money? I'm renting money. I'm renting it.
Yep.
And that rent cost has gone up anywhere between 40 and 100 basis points, or, 0.5% to a full percent. You say, well, okay. If my interest costs only represent 10% of all my input costs, that's no big deal. But if you're working on a 2% margin, profit margin, that is a significant difference.
Well, let's just think about it this way. The average person that doesn't use a tremendous amount of borrowed money for operating, like much of production agriculture does, they might say, okay, interest rates went up 1%. What's the big deal? When it goes from 3 to 4, 1% increase, it really is a 25% more. 3 to 4 is a 25 to 33% more cost of the money. So if your rent went up 25 to 33%, it's not that it went up 1 point. It went from 3 to 4, which is a huge advance of the actual cost of money.
And then let's take that one further step for those that don't understand agriculture. And they're probably not listening to this, but who knows? Maybe someone's driving around in their Corvette listening for something.
Yeah, I guess some non-ag listeners, yeah.
Farmers do not control the price of the product they sell. It's set by the market.
Yeah.
So it's not like the retailer down the street that says, the cost of a 6-pack of Coke is costing me 25 or 30 or 40% more, or the cost of the gasoline I'm putting in the tank for you to put in your car is costing 20.
Yeah, the ability to pass on costs. The ability to pass on costs.
Right.
Is harder.
At best, the market recognizes it maybe the next season, or perhaps even further out than that. In the meantime, you have farmers that have made some choices. All before this happened. One, I'm going to be open to the market, right? I'm going to take my gamble in the market. And if corn today is $5 and I'm hoping it's going to be $7, well, good for you. It doesn't always work that way. There's the ones that are very conservative and follow many of their bankers' leads and their advisors and say, I should probably lock in or contract some of this corn to make sure that I have an established margin so my operating lender feels comfortable. That all got blown up at the beginning of this year. All of it's blown up. Budgets that were set between the banker and the farmer, those input costs are up 30%, depending on where you're farming, what it is, and what it consists of. And while revenue has gone up, many of them had their corn locked in or their beans locked in or contracted. So it's kind of the double whammy effect of this, and it hit everybody. I remember reading last year in July, fertilizer costs are going up, blah, blah. And there were many farmers that last fall kind of did the right thing, but there's plenty of them today that are open to the market on all their input costs, didn't plan ahead, and it's hurting them.
Yeah. So if you didn't have, so we know that input prices And again, I always reference that there are folks that are a little bit further removed. So just it was on a Fox News bit yesterday. Urea is up 160%, in the last 6 months, and anhydrous, which we use for nitrogen. If you're a cranberry producer in Massachusetts, you're like, okay, Damian, what's all this stuff mean? Anhydrous, we use it for nitrogen because obviously wheat and particularly corn are grass plants that require a great deal of nitrogen. Those costs are all up exceedingly over what would be the transitory 7.9% inflation we're being told about by our Federal Reserve.
Right.
Anyway, I've also pointed out, Curt, those numbers are complete bullshit. The same government that told you that inflation was transitory, they started telling us that 1 year ago. And I said, okay, transitory is a word that I never used in all of my agricultural economics studies, but I can tell you this, it's supposed to mean temporary. Well, you know what? Cancer's temporary. Everything's temporary. So
right.
what, saying something is transitory when you really mean temporary. Well, the truth is everything's temporary until it kills you. I don't see any way that we can pretend it's only 7.9% inflation when you see just everything from a chicken breast at the store to the price of fertilizer. And these numbers are really going to put a squeeze on us, but the margins are still there if you didn't sell all of your crop, right?
I agree with that. Can I just step back a second on this?
Sure.
So I laugh because people say, okay, so fertilizer cost has gone up, big deal. Let me just go through a list of a budget that I looked at last week of a farmer. So I said, okay, tell me about your budget. And he says, well, let's see. All my input costs have gone up. That would be fertilizer, chemical, diesel, propane, repairs, custom work, land rent, labor, and interest, he said, and interest. Mm-hmm. He said, did I miss anything, Curt? I said, I think you pretty much covered it all.
Seed and feed, he didn't maybe get those two, but pretty much everything. And it's all the same situation.
And it's interesting because he's also got some rented ground. And so I'll just kind of give you an example. In this state that he operates in, land rent, $250 an acre. Okay. If you use typical input costs for this year based on his budget, typical plus his overhead, his break even is now about $5.50 for corn. Last year it was about $4. That's $1.50. Now, if he may have been planning ahead, locked in his corn at $5 and said, hey, I think I'm going to be good for now. All of a sudden he finds himself potentially upside down if he hasn't locked in any of his input costs. And since you're a big Texas fan, right? The old Texas hedge, right?
Yeah.
So I'm telling you, I'm not saying this for those farmers that were judicious, that were planning ahead, that thought about this and got lucky in some cases, are going to have a decent year. But there are other commodities out there, Damian, that you're open to the market no matter what you do. And there's just not a lot you can do about it.
So where do you see, I'm obviously around a lot of corn and soybean people, being an Indiana guy, and then my work I do with Extreme Ag, which, dear listener, if you have not tuned into Extreme Ag to check that out, I'd encourage you to do it. If you want to see what some of the more progressive, success-minded, yield record-setting farms are doing, especially with trials for some of the products that have not even yet come to market and some that are new to market, go to extremeag.farm. There's no E on the front of Extreme, extremeag.farm. We've produced like 60 or 70 videos already, great product trials, business practices, family business, chemistry, all the different things that happen. Go and check out extremeag.farm. Anyway, these guys are telling me they're going to be okay because you got the crop insurance ability, you've got the government program ability, you can lock in a profit unless we have some crazy thing. And again, if you weren't oversold. So I think we're okay there. Where is it going to hurt? Are cattle people? I think cattle, if are you selling cattle, are you getting hurt? If you're selling strawberries, are you getting hurt? Where are you getting hurt right now?
Boy, it's interesting because I think the cattle market, while it's improving, again, while top line revenue seems to be improving, certainly for the cow-calf operator, their input cost, the price of it, I didn't even get into this, but the price of hay, number one hay in certain parts of this country, $350 a ton. Now, I don't care whether you're a dairy or you're a feedlot operation, or whether you're a farmer feeder, or whether you're just a cow-calf operation that needs exit $350 a ton is $150 a ton over what a lot of them would view as being a reasonable price for hay. So that cost alone, the crops that are going to get hurt the worst this year, in my opinion, are those specialty crops, because here's the problem and here's the solution. The problem is going to be labor costs that no one's talking about. Yep. And I'm telling you, friggin' labor costs is an issue. And where all the specialty crops, a lot of them are grown in the free state of California, right? God bless them. But if you're in the specialty crop business, first of all, it's hard to find labor. Yep. They've all migrated to the construction side where they're getting 25, 30, 40, 50 bucks an hour to pound nails.
Yeah. So the thing that you're pointing out, and I've been saying this to my audience, is that we have a situation where and I get interviewed on Newsmax TV and Cheddar News and whatnot, and I keep bringing it back to labor also, and of course energy. But like you just said, I live half the year in Arizona, and you can talk about what comes across the border and all that. If you were needing specialty crop help in specialty products here in Arizona, like you said, these guys, they need roofers. So semi-skilled, if you can just bump from being a celery cutter to the next level, like you said, carrying shingles, you're going to make more money by double. And this will be a real issue. And you're in Florida part of your life, most of your life, same issue there. When you've got a building boom and you can't build houses fast enough, and the only issue there is, can you get the shingles? We're going to see this. I think it doesn't end in 2022 either.
Yeah, I don't think it ends, and particularly depending what state you live in, and Arizona is not immune to this, but if you particularly look at California, here's what's going to happen, right? The advocates for higher wages for unskilled labor in the farming business is going to get driven out by technology. And I've seen, and I've been to demonstrations of labor replacing, not labor saving, completely labor replacing technology. Right. And I remember a year ago, that's probably 2 years, a year and a half ago, a strawberry harvesting equipment where the technology company said, we're only about 25% effective. In other words, if there were 100 berries to be picked, about 25 of them get picked and not squished by the technology, right? Or it doesn't get mixed. He thinks this year, so a year later, they'll be at 50%. And he thinks that within 3 years, they will be able to completely replace, if you're willing to buy the equipment, right? And assuming you have labor shortages, which are going to be out west forever. It is mind-boggling what's going to happen.
So I've been saying this exact thing to my audience. Meat processing is another one, Curt, that we're not there yet. And I said the first one that's going to come to is poultry, because poultry is the most standard-sized product. You bring a damn steer. It could be an 850-pound steer or an 1,850-pound steer. You can't set an assembly line. I worked in a factory for 3 summers. My wife's a factory worker, growing up. I know how manufacturing works. You can't set mechanically automated line for something that varies that much. But on chickens, that chicken don't vary from 6.4 pounds, period. So that's what's going to happen first. You talked about strawberries. The other thing I thought you were going to tell me was, with the cost of labor going up, if this new technology that can pick strawberries rather than human hands having to do it, if they get to where they can get 50% of the crop, they'll probably just go ahead and do it and say it's cheaper to waste half the crop than to hire human hands. And that's the sad thing. It contributes right back to food waste, but it's because we can't get the human hands.
Right. And the other thing that we've done is we've encouraged people not to go out to the farm and work. Do you know the average age of the average farm worker that's out there today is as old as the owner of that farm himself? They're in their 60s. That next generation down has, either through education or the decision that they don't want to go work on the farm, that they're going to go do something else. You can still find the labor, but it's incredibly aged. And it's not just it's in all sectors of agriculture everywhere. Thankfully, if you go through the Midwest, it's not as labor intensive. It's, more machinery intensive. But in the end, look, if look, if you own a dairy in the Midwest, you got the exact same problem that a dairy out west does. You got to find milkers, you got to find herdsmen, you got to make sure those people show up every day. And given where and what I have to admit, what this administration has done by just handing out money for too long a period of time has encouraged people to not work.
Yeah, by the way, I rent my farm ground to a large scale dairy operator in Indiana. And yeah, the base level job that when you come to his place and say, my cousin says I can come here and have a job. They're like, okay, first job they give you is you spray off and clean the udders and the teats of the cows and you put the milkers on. And to people that aren't around this, it was about 5 years ago on a CNN story. They said, well, they don't milk them by hand anymore. They have machines. And then there are some people that first off thought we still milk cows by hand. And secondly, I think they thought the machine was just, it ran around and did it. No, there are vacuum things, but you still have human hands to put them on. My understanding is on the dairy front that robotics you can't buy robots now because of the same problem we're all facing. The dairy said, screw it. I'm going to go ahead and start doing part of mine and phasing in robotics. And you can't get the robotics anymore. It's in tremendous demand, is my understanding.
Yeah, the first, if I could just, it was interesting when robotics first came out. The challenge was A, does it work? But B, could you get someone there to replace it or fix it or do some work on it if you had a problem? That was the initial one was, well, hey, great, I'm going to put this on my little 400 cow dairy, but the supplier is in Wisconsin and the only repair guy I know, would have to drive from who knows where to where. Today, that's not the issue. Now the issue is, can you scale this up for a 5,000 cow dairy? And the answer is yes, you can.
Yeah, it looks like that's happening. So we just talked about strawberries, talked about dairy, we talked about labor. I think we all have that. Let's move on to the next topic that you touched on, going back to from the banker's role. Again, we borrow a lot of money in production agriculture. And even if you don't, there's probably somebody saying, hey, I've always stayed small. I've always paid cash for my operating. Maybe when it's 3% money, I was stupid to do that. But now we're talking 5% borrowed operating capital. I'm not going to do it. Even they have to look at things from the perspective of the banker. 10-7-3-1 rule. What's that mean?
I always grew up in this. I can't remember so I've been doing this 45 years. I can't remember who told me this, but
it doesn't look a day. If you're watching this, dear viewer, remember we got the YouTube channel, Damian Mason's channel. Go to YouTube, hit subscribe, and he doesn't look a day over 50. Okay, Curt, you've been doing it for 4 years. 10-7-3-1 rule. Everybody has little rules in their industry that even folks outside of it don't know. So what's that mean?
So in normal times, if you get 10 applications in the door, 7 of them are viable, meaning it's a loan you think you can make. Out of those 7, you get 3 of them that tell you, yeah, move ahead. Let's pursue the request and let's get me approved. Get them approved and one of them takes the deal. Mm-hmm. So
seven of them are worth. 7 of them as a lender. 7 of them you would have loaned money to. Out of the 10, there was 3 that you just threw out. There's a reason. But only 1 of the 7 used to come through.
Yep, and we used to say, there was an old saying that if 1 out of every 10 deals get done, thank the other 9 for getting you the 10th.
Right. And then I remember my banker friends also, Curt, told me that if you've never made a bad loan, you probably missed out on a lot of good ones. I remember that being a banker rule too.
Right. Yeah. So I had a fellow I worked with one time that said, I've never made a bad loan. I said, well, you probably haven't made enough. but now we're at the 10 applications come in. Maybe 5 of them are viable, given where interest rates are. Given where land values are, and people say, well, yeah, I got all this land equity. Hey, that's great. But if you're going to borrow off this land equity, the cost of that is going to go way up. And so you might have 10 that come in, 5 that appear viable. Today, out of those 5, you're lucky sometimes if one of them says, I'm ready to move ahead, but I need a better interest rate. I can't gift you. This is, you're looking at it, pal. This is as good as it gets. And a lot of them just say, let me think about that. And then they go dark.
So when they go dark, does that mean that they didn't need the capital, or it means that that someone else wanted the deal worse and is giving them a better terms? What happens?
I think they came to a realization maybe this is not a great deal.
Okay. So,
but there has to be some education between the banker and the borrower. You say, look, I can do this deal, but if it's if this is going to cost you, 100 basis points more, right? Another full percent. Here's what it does to your repayment ability. Here's what it does to your liquidity, because you're going to drain cash to make those payments. Here's what your crop commodity prices have to be on a go-forward basis to make all this work. And then all of a sudden, they wake up the next morning in bed at 3 a.m. going, holy shit, maybe this isn't a great idea.
Yeah.
They do come to the realization, right? They do come to the realization. I would tell you the ones that come to it first are the ones that went through the 80s.
Hey folks, got a question for my farmer and landowner friends out there. Have you ever lost yield to an unexpected pest or disease? Of course you have. Every season you're forced to guess about some of your most important management decisions. What if I told you that you don't have to anymore? Pattern Ag offers the most advanced soil analysis available today. In addition to a comprehensive nutrient analysis like any soil survey would give you, Pattern can predict next season's risk from the most damaging of pests and diseases. Things like corn rootworm, soybean cyst nematode, sudden death syndrome, and more. For the first time ever, a single soil analysis can help you optimize your crop protection and fertility spend at a subfield, field, and operational level. Isn't it time to refine your management decisions, optimize your inputs, and maximize your yield? Of course it is. Go to www.pattern.ag and get started today. Most of my listeners probably skew younger because more podcast listeners are younger than older, meaning there's not as many 75-year-olds that listen to podcasts. But I would say this. I just had this discussion with a younger, meaning he's 30s, listener. And I said, man, I don't pull that thing of walking uphill to school both ways in the blizzard like your grandparents talked about. And I know that the younger people in their 30s, Curt, have heard enough about the 80s. They've heard about the 1980s. They've heard about the 1980s. I said, I ain't going to do that. But just kind of like I put in my book, I said, I'll just tell it this way. And it's not bullshit. This is a true story. In the 80s, there were some farming assets that were so bad off, the bank wouldn't repossess them. And that's the best way to explain the 80s. We can talk about how terrible it was. Interest rates spiked. There was no commodity demand. Farmers were there were some farming situations that were so bad, the bank wouldn't even repossess because the bank didn't want it. That's how underwater they were. That's a true story.
And can I tell you, in the last dairy crisis in 08, 09, there were some dairies that had an appraised value of close to zero, meaning the milk prices were so bad, absolutely no sales activity to justify the value that they wanted to do a refinance. And ultimately, those deals that went into workout, the bank said, you know what, we're just going to need to milk these cows. we're going to need to milk these cows, and we're going to need to keep this facility operating. So right on warm idle until things get better. And
like you said, liquidating it was liquidating into not only a loss, a zero.
Right.
So we might as well operate. We might as well operate at a little bit of something. So speaking of this farm situation, Chicago Federal Reserve, Curt, tells me, I read the article, it was New Year's time, that Midwest farm ground went up 18% in calendar year 2021. I read that and I said, I can do anecdotal evidence that says it's been more than 18%. I can go, and again, it's not empirical. I don't have every stat, but I can just give you reference from agricultural properties that I'm seeing. And I said, I think the number's 30%. Now, whether it's 18 or 30, it's up a bunch. Some might even say it's up 50. A friend that I know in agriculture walked away from bidding for a 68 acre chunk. And I know to the Western people, 68 acres. Well, in Indiana, we get precipitation. 68 acres, you can actually do something with. He walked away from the bidding. He walked away from the bidding on that at $17,000 an acre. It would have sold for probably $8,000 4 years ago. So going from 8 to 17 in 4 years. Come on. We got some real issues out here on land values, and it's being paid for apparently. So you talk about deals, talk about interests. What's going on?
Well, it's interesting. I would say, and particularly in the Midwest, you kind of had this bifurcated model. You had really good properties, good corn suitability rating, average production history, whatever, that commanded, and maybe pivot irrigated, it commanded the highest price and people bid on it. And most of the time when they went to auction, the ones that were auctioning it had a very low level of debt on their existing property and thought, okay, if I just do dollar cost averaging, I've got an average of whatever, $2,000 an acre in debt across all my properties, even though I'm willing to pay 17 or 18 for this and get a big fat loan on it. Dollar cost says I can afford this. And then you had the other properties on the other end that weren't the highest quality properties, were not, what I would say suitable to most either investors or other farmers, that did have a decline, had a decline of, in some cases, in pockets, we saw land values went down 25%. That's not the case anymore. There seems to be this, and I'm very concerned about this because I see bankers following the same trend where if you got dirt, you can't get hurt.
So yeah, my favorite thing, I saw it at the Kansas Bankers Ag Conference a few years ago when they talked about the young folks that said, if you got the dirt, you can't get hurt. My parents bought a chunk of farm ground right when we were starting to not be broke in 1981. And then that farm ground became worth less than half. A year later, it was less than half of what they had given for it. So they did thereby ensure that we would stay broke for another 10 years.
Yeah. Well, I think my challenge is today, there's a lot of lenders in the market that are reaching. And they're reaching because they have goals to meet.
Mm. So,
and the goals aren't about earnings. The goals are about growing assets on your books. And I get it, but here's the deal that I've learned over, and it took me a while to figure it out, right? I mean, in the 80s, we were collateral lenders, just exactly like you said, Damon. You were collateral buyers, actually, in the 80s. I'm seeing some institutions, some lenders starting to reach that are reverting back. You got dirt, you can't get hurt mentality, and being collateral lenders. We learned in the 80s we were collateral lenders, and our regulators taught us, oh, no, you need to be cash flow lenders. Well, that turned off the spigot, because if you were basing everything on just cash flow, as well as I do, and even today, you cannot get a piece of property on a standalone basis to cash flow. It's almost impossible where it is today. So we became very pragmatic. And our regulators helped us along. We were a little slow as ag lenders, and we said, "Oh, can we be pragmatic about this? Collateral's important, so's cash flow. Let's find a way to do." And we've been that way. But I'm telling you now, I'm seeing lenders starting to reach, and that concerns me. In a high interest rate environment, frothy commodity prices, high land values. And I'm just a little concerned about it, because I think my personal opinion is, and this is me speaking, we're not that far away from a recession.
You spoke about the yield curve early on, and a lot of folks, hear that and they're like, what are they talking about? And it's always supposed to be predictive of recessions. And, I get it. Yield curve simply means that when short-term money is paying more than long-term money, it means we have, it's silly. Why would you do that? Right. Long-term money should always pay more. So I don't even have to look at that. I always just go by a bit of data and my gut. And when things look this frothy, I own a house in Arizona. When they tell me my house is worth 33% more than it was a year prior, I'm like, this seems a little wacky. This seems a little out of touch. The commodity prices, there's all these other things going on. So recessionary times may not be coming. Ag might just be letting the curve. We were ahead of the whole mainstream on these values ascending. What if we were just the torchbearer for the inflation that was to come? And then after the inflation comes some sort of massive correction. Is that what he thinks is going to happen?
I do. I do.
And the people that are paying $17,000 an acre for farm ground that was just $8,000 3 years ago, what are you going to tell them?
You better have an outside job.
Okay. What about interest? I it seems that they were telling us we were going to do 6, 8, 10 interest rate hikes over the next year because we've got to tame things. Now they're a little gun shy. What is interest rates? I think they go up a bit more. I don't think they go up as much as we might have thought. So another half.
Yeah, I have to use even numbers because I'm kind of a stupid banker. So we start talking 3, 5, and 7, 9. I don't get that. 2, 4, 6, 8. I'm good with. I thought there was going to be 4 rate hikes. I think the Federal Reserve and Powell have looked at this Ukrainian situation and said, and we're inflation. I just think everybody's going to take a step back here and say, is this the time to be raising rates given the turmoil that we're seeing in international markets and the impact that it's had on the domestic market? I'm not saying there aren't going to be rate hikes because I think food inflation is the real deal and it's not going away at the end of the summer like a lot of people think, or in the fall. And a lot of it's tied to there are certain cost increases that are not going away. We talked about labor, but interest costs are going to stay up without question. Fuel costs, unless we decide to make some significant changes, in how we see our oil business domestically, I think that tied up with what is going to be a protracted supply chain issue, the trucking, transportation, boats, planes, trains, automobiles, it's going to continue to, look, when you can ship, this is what's crazy. During the pandemic, you could ship commodities in a 747 over to Southeast Asia and into Latin America cheaper than you could put it on a boat.
Yeah, when you're using an airplane and it's more cheap than a cargo ship, it doesn't seem to make any sense. But it's because there's no demand for the plane, right?
Exactly. So now that the demand, I just think this is going to be very protracted and could get a little bit difficult.
I believe that you and I both agree on that. And I don't want to sound like an old timer. And certainly I'm an optimist. I mean, I've been running my own business for 28 years and I've been through a lot of from 9/11 to the whole recession, the housing bust, to the pandemic. I've been through a lot of these things. And I'm not in any way wishing on to anybody. I just look around and my gut always tells me something, and my gut tells me now things are a little bit out of whack, and and I agree with you that this inflationary situation. And when I get interviewed on the media, I said, this isn't because our farms can't produce the stuff. It's because of the human hands. And the sad part, this is all government induced. We shut down economies. We threw a complete wrench into the whole labor situation. There was no shortage of labor 2 years ago. If you had a dry cleaners and you just needed somebody to come and be a dry cleaner clerk, by God, you put a sign out and you got somebody. Now they got signs that say, we'll give you $21 an hour and a 401k to come here and flip burgers. So This is not because of any normal natural thing. It's because of government shutdowns that distorted the marketplace. And unfortunately, the same thing with fuel. We can grow the crop. Granted, we're paying more for seed, feed, fuel, fertilizer, if you can get fertilizer, interest, as you said, everything. But we can still do the thing. It gets on a truck. That box of Wheaties has more fuel in it than wheat in it, right?
Right. Yeah. The biggest issue that I see is not the long haul transportation. You can find plenty of trucks that'll take you from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the northern border to the southern border. It's that it's a short haul where you had local truckers that could haul your milk off the farm to the processor, could haul your grain to the elevator, could haul your produce to where it needed to go, not to a terminal market, but to go get it. Those truckers are hard to find. They left the farm, they left the business, and are doing other things. And let me just tell you, if I were smart, I'd get out of the banking business and go start up a short-term trucking business, and I'd lease everything, and I'd turn it back in after this all gets fixed.
Probably so, but you'd be in the same situation. I'm going to be talking tomorrow with my buddy that's in the trucking business. He can't get truck drivers. So,
yeah, it's a real problem.
I thought you were going to say if you were smart. Sometimes I think if I was smart, I'd stop the speaking and ag racket and just go get my CDL.
That's what I'm saying. Get in the track. I'm being very comfortable living in, a big sleeper and just traveling the U.S. and dropping stuff off.
So there was that show, since we're talking about the 80s, there was a show in the 80s called BJ and the Bear. It was about a guy that drove around his truck with a monkey named Bear. I could just be like, Damian and his dog, just driving around with my dog. Okay. Farm income then, I think it's going to be better than certainly what we were predicting. We were saying in the fall, oh shit, it's going to be terrible. These guys are going to get washed on inputs. Interest rates are going to go up a bunch because of the chairman of the Federal Reserve saying that. Then we saw this rally, there's $16 soybeans and $7 corn and wheat. The Chicago Board of Trade says it's $13. If you actually have new crop wheat coming in, you're going to harvest in June or July. You can't get anybody that's going to give you $13 for it. So that's a spread like we've never seen before. The real number is going to be like $9 or $10, which is still quite good. So there's going to be a lot of income coming in. If you didn't overextend yourself, with the exception of, like you said, some of the specialty crops, in general, I think farm income is going to look better than anybody thought just a couple months ago.
Yeah, if you were just ignorant of everything that was going on and saying, hey, I'm just going to grow my crop of, fence row to fence row, and I'm going to stay open to the market, you're going to hit a lick this year. But, I don't even know if the number's correct anymore, but they say that less than 5% of all farmers really have a marketing plan,
right.
Or contracting, hedging, using options, whatever it is. And the rest of them are open to the market. Well, this is the 1 in 5 years where being open to the market is going to pay off. Anybody that may have locked in prices early are still going to be profitable, but not as profitable as they would have been had they been open. And I'm not advocating, as a lender, I am not advocating being open to the market, but I'm also not advocating
being 100% sold.
Exactly.
Don't ever be 100% sold, but also don't be open to 100% exposure. And that's generally what you get coached from. We work with Sylvius, which is a company that is all about the integration of government programs with crop insurance and your marketing plan. And that's right. The big thing is trade, our last topic. No, second to last topic. I've been telling people for as long as they'll listen that China does not want to be our customer. They want to be our replacement. China told us they were going to buy $50 billion worth of our stuff so that we would lift tariffs. That was 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. We said, well, we're going to buy $50 billion. And I said, that's a bunch of lies. They're not going to do that. Last year, they met at 66%, just enough for a passing grade of a D. They bought $33 billion worth of our agricultural stuff. Mm-hmm. Mexico, almost 26 billion, less than 10% of the population of China, Mexico, but they're damn close to them in terms of commodity, and certainly on a dollars of commodity of ag stuff purchases per human, Mexico's blowing them out of the water. I say concentrate on Mexico, Europe, now with the Ukraine situation, and wean ourselves off of China, just like we can wean ourselves off of buying their crap, wean ourselves off of the need to sell them our crap, because they don't want to buy our crap 2 years from now. 5 years from now, they don't even want to buy our stuff. They want to just take Ukraine stuff. That's probably what's going on right now. They're going to just divvy up Ukraine, China, and Russia. Am I wrong?
The only thing that's kept them from being a powerhouse in the dairy business is being able to accumulate enough land to grow the feed.
Right.
So you got to go out to 50,000 rural farmers and say, hey, we're gonna take your 3 acres, and we're going to start growing ham. They've replaced it. Not that this is a big business, but I used to grow walnuts. You don't export walnuts here; they grow more than we do, right? I mean, and that's just an anecdotal example. But here's the thing: like when you look at Mexico, there's a lot of U.S. based farming companies that are doing business down there, so they have economic interests, and those economic interests can be beneficial to the U.S. in terms of its trade. Because I think I have some very good friends in the big avocado business. Right. And when the USDA inspector got the bad phone call, and he says, well, based on that bad phone call and the threat I got, we're just going to shut down trade. That I would encourage you to just go look at what happened to, there's one that's publicly traded. I'll just leave it at that. What happened to their stock? Mm-hmm. And my whole point is that interdependence can be good and it can be bad. But clearly, if you look at what goes on in Latin America, there's a lot of U.S. influence in those markets down there, and it's to the benefit of the U.S., in my opinion, in terms of trade.
Yeah. So you agree with me that we could have a better America's trade and be less dependent on China trade. And again, it strengthens the block.
Right.
You could even make the environmental argument that it's better for the environment than hauling stuff across the Pacific. But also, I think there's the geopolitical turmoil situation that can be averted.
Well, labor costs are cheap in Latin America. The other thing is we can't afford to lose those partners to China, because China would love to partner up with Latin America, and we got to stop that from happening.
Well, they'd steal their resources, and they'd also have a huge business partner in our backyard that again puts them in the Western Hemisphere and puts us more at risk. So
exactly,
that's the concern there. And I know my ag people, they don't know, they know I'm not yelling at them, but I go to these ag meetings and I preach this anti-China thing, and I know that the guy who raises pork or they're sitting out there saying, "Damian, that's our biggest customer." I'm like, I'm fine. I get that. But it's time for us to not just become too complacent. Just because it's easy to have them as a customer and it's big doesn't mean it's good for us long term. And I think it's really bad for us long term.
Middle class in Latin America is growing, I think, at a very fast pace. And those are our ultimate consumers.
Yeah, with the exception of Venezuela, we got a real good.
Well, that's correct. Yep.
Last thoughts, Curt Covington, weather. And we don't talk about the weather too much here. There is concern about our own productivity with this massive run up in commodity prices. Wheat's up 70% or something like this, depending on the day to day. And I don't do minute by minute market graphing, but we got dryness. A friend of mine going to be on my Business of Ag Success group on Friday as a presenter. They grow about 11,000 acres of wheat in Colorado, and some of it they planted in the fall never even came up. So they didn't have any moisture. We talk about throwing fuel on the fire of wheat shortages. We don't grow a lot of wheat in Indiana. We grow some, and we have precipitation, so we can grow it. We just don't have a lot there. It's the Central Plains and in the Northwest. They're all dry. Are we going to be?
Yeah, so I was asked this question not too long ago. What can a farmer? It's always the great question what can a farmer do? Well, unless you're a god, you can't make it rain anymore. But what you are seeing, and I do think that there's going to be a challenge. I think you see cow-calf operation and feeders that are starting to thin their herds because they just don't have enough feed. You're looking at dairy operations that maybe, milk might be $23 a hundredweight, but if your margins are squeezed to the point that you can't afford to pay for the hay, the labor, again, not to go down the entire list again.
Yeah.
Maybe it's better to shrink than to grow, right? And then, are there alternative crops you can grow? Well, that sounds great, but this isn't, there are parts of Pacific Northwest where, wheat is what wheat is, right? And it's a thriving commodity, particularly in the eastern half. And bottom line is, what can you do? Well, I know they're looking at kind of a model that they use in California, which is, water wheeling, or what you call, basically water banking and selling it from the north to the south. And that all sounds great, but it's not a developed market. It's just kind of a test. In the meantime, your grass is burning up.
Right.
I've had heard some farmers that, are, irrigating, that have the ability, they'll do deficit irrigation. In other words, instead of pouring the water on, to get that crop, they might, pour 2/3 of the water on and get a smaller crop, maybe not the quality as good as it is, but it gets them through. But the bottom line is the feed, the cow-calf operations, the dairy operations, they're going to have a tough time getting feed up in that area, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And then remember, I always have to correct people, and I don't do it in any condescending way, but I remember once when grains got like this before, a decade or so ago, and I said, I don't know if you can have that cattle operation when you're feeding $7 corn. And the guy said, but I'm not feeding $7 corn. See, I grow it myself. And I said, well, if you could harvest it and take it to the grain elevator and sell it for $7, you're feeding $7 corn. And that was something that I couldn't quite communicate to this person, that he thought that he was only feeding $4.75 corn because he grew it himself. And I said, no, you're feeding $7 corn because that's what you could be selling it for. So the reality is that's going to be an issue on that. So I agree with you that we're going to see some squeeze on livestock that needs the grain for feed with the stock to use ratios and the amount of grain price escalation we've seen. And this would be a tough time. It's kind of like the perfect storm. We've already got the Ukraine, we got the inputs, we got the inflation, we got turmoil. We're trying to come out of the government locking things down, getting back to normal. And then if we see a weather event, it's the perfect storm, and it's not something that we want to see.
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. Just one anecdotal story. Farmers are particularly the ones that have been faced with that are faced with crises, and they have to deal with it themselves. They're the most resilient, thoughtful, creative group of business owners in the United States. And I'll tell you why. I look at, if I just relate one story to water, right? California is a bellwether state for doing stupid things when it comes to water, right? Everyone says, oh, it's the drought. California, it is not a drought. California's been going through these cycles long before I was born. What we failed to do was rebuild infrastructure. We failed to build higher dams. We failed to build more dams. We failed to improve our canal systems. And we let another 10 billion people into this. That's exaggeration, but we let 10 million more people into the state, and they're all living in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and have no idea that there's an issue here until they can't flush their toilet or brush their teeth. And that's what it's going to come down to. But it's interesting. I'm dealing with some farmers in Kern County area, and they're the first ones. And so the SGMA rule, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, is going to start restricting the amount of water you can pump out of the ground. It's a perfect storm because they've got young pistachios, which are drought resistant. And on similar pieces of property in that water district, they have some very old almonds that are going to start to eat their economic life. So they're going to push pile and burn those almonds, preserve that water for the pistachios, and it's actually going to improve the overall value and plant value based on the projections we've seen. And they'll have plenty of water to farm that. So it's going to be the old hopscotch farming thing, right? Yep. And so farmers get very creative. And I look at that deal and they say, would you finance this? I said, not only would I finance it, I'd buy it.
Yeah. Because like you said, it went from looking like, boy, we're screwed, to now it's just going to be, they're shuffling around. They're going to lose acres, but they're going to gain productivity. And it's because it's fixed based on water. Interesting. Because I've also got, we're recording this after I recorded with almonds, and I'm going to be dropping an almond episode, which the listener can go and listen to because I will drop it before this one. And it's all about what you just talked about. This
is coming down to the haves and the have-nots out west. It's going to be the have, and that includes Arizona, that includes, Oregon, Washington, California, probably Idaho as well. It's going to be the have and the have-nots. And ultimately, those that planned ahead, those that saw this coming, those that have, done something to be proactive in dealing with this are going to survive, and they're going to thrive. The ones that are sitting back there saying, hey, we'll just sue the government. Good luck. SGMA in California is litigation proof, in my opinion. And if you don't think that's true, wait until they take your water over, because they already have. They just don't know it.
Yeah, I know, and it's nothing we're cheering on, you and I. It's just that we understand the reality of it. It's going to be the haves and the have-nots of water, and it's going to be the battle. And frankly, I think that battle happens everywhere from about Colorado west. It might even creep into the Ogallala situation.
Texas and Kansas. Yep.
The environmentalists have been after the Ogallala aquifer pumping since I was a kid. All right. They want to learn more about what you got to say. His name's Curt Covington. I keep up with him on LinkedIn. Curt with a C, Covington with a C. Curt Covington, Senior Director of Institutional Credit, AgAmerica. AgAmerica is one of the largest non-bank agricultural lending firms in the United States of America. Curt's my buddy. We've been on the dais together at different speaking events and corporate meetings. And also he's been on this podcast before. He'll be back because he's always got good stuff to say. If they want to find you or find AgAmerica, where do they go?
www.agamerica.com.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
I wish you brought more optimistic news. You always bring a little bit of a Debbie Downer, like, things are tough. It's gonna, you told there are gonna be some, but you know what? I like real information, and I think my listeners do too.
I appreciate it. It's always good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
See you. Thanks for being here. Till next time, it's the Business of Agriculture.
This episode of The Business of Agriculture was brought to you by Nori. If you're feeling left out of carbon markets, Nori is a carbon removal marketplace that welcomes early adopters of regenerative farming. We work directly with farmers to enter their data and project their carbon credits, which the farmer owns and sets the price on. Nori is the marketplace, not the middleman, so farmers get paid directly once their credits are sold. We believe that carbon credits should be an asset the farmer controls, not the rights that they sell. To learn more on how you can enroll your farm, visit nori.com/growers. And if you are a company looking to get involved with carbon markets, reach out to hello@nori.com. Nori, a carbon marketplace for early adopters. Visit nori.com/growers.